Welcome back to Business AM. This is Metropole Television. This is your economic review this morning. The biggest items that you need to know as we start the conversation about our economy this morning. We are joined by Reginald, who's today in the morning right in the house. Now, with the COVID-19 biting hard in the economy, the Treasury is set to miss revenue targets by 212 billion in the 9 months between July 2019 to March this year. In a supplementary budget tabled in Parliament on Wednesday last week, the government collected 1.3 trillion against a target of 1.5 trillion, with the blame pushed to poor economic climate in the country brought about by the COVID-19 pandemic. Government agencies as well as devolved units failed to meet expenditure, with 216.1 billion underutilized, having spent 1.8 trillion out of the 2.01 trillion projected to have been spent for the period. In its 2019-2020 financial year supplementary budget estimates, Treasury seeks to further reduce spending to the national government by 73.4 billion. On the other hand, consolidated fund service is expected to increase by 64.7 billion, which will see the overall budget reduced by 9.7 billion from the 3.13 trillion post-supplementary budget to 3.12 trillion. Now, what effect does the reducing the consolidated fund have on the liquidity in the economy? Now, also, the Treasury will, on top of this, have to do without the 172 billion, according to Treasury CS Okurietan, under the Tax Amendments Bill 2020. The scary find itself at a hard place now more than ever as it tries to raise this revenue. Good. All right, Reginald, that is the topic this morning, therefore. I mean, we're talking about a time when now more than ever we have put Kerry under pressure, when in reality it is a body that has not been performing. Just let's understand, what does it mean when the consolidated funds now are increasing when in reality our collections are reducing? Just make somebody understand really what that means.
Thank you. So what we are facing here is a government in a situation where their revenues are reducing, but the expenditure are increasing at the same time. As you earlier mentioned on a reduction in the consolidated fund. Well, just to explain the consolidated fund, because the fund is where all the revenue of the government and all the expenditure of the government actually comes from. The reduction of the consolidated fund is literally basically a function of how much they collect, and it will reduce because they are missing their tax collection targets. They were already missing the tax collection targets. It has just been expounded by the COVID-19, so it will not be fair for them to entirely blame it on the COVID-19. The economy was ailing before the COVID-19. So even if we are going to use a COVID-19 analogy to this, they say the people that die are the ones that have underlying problems. And currently the Kenyan economy had underlying problems before COVID-19 came. And so COVID-19 is just making the situation worse. So as Kenyans and as economists and as business people, we should not forget the underlying problems that were there before COVID-19. A scenario where revenue starts declining for the government and expenditure starts increasing is a scenario where our budget deficit starts increasing. And that is a dangerous position, because when a budget deficit starts increasing, then it only spells two things: an increase in taxation and an increase in debt. The country is already heavily indebted. KRA is missing their tax target. So increase in taxation, that's why you find the bill that went to Parliament had the tax measures of reducing taxation in certain areas, but on the same bill, they had to increase taxation on the other side, so that it becomes a zero-sum game. They are losing revenue here, but they're also trying to make it through other means and other areas, which now puts the government in a serious quagmire. And the person who suffers in all this is now becomes the economy, because the tools of the government, especially on the fiscal side, which is what we are discussing now, is to try and stimulate the economy, is trying to grow output or to grow GDP. If the government is in a situation where now they are not able to do that, they are not able to grow output and grow GDP, it means that they are not able to increase unemployment. If they're not able to create jobs through the fiscal policy measures, then unemployment will become a bigger problem. And with unemployment, we know what comes after that. Society disintegrates, crime starts increasing, and starts having ripple effects that go on. So as a government right now, yes, their worry is, where do we get this revenue from? But with a grinding or slowing economy, even if you increase VAT right now, if people are not purchasing, you only collect VAT when people actually sell. Or a manufacturer buys inputs and produces. If the manufacturer is scaling down production, then we have a problem. So the government now needs to see is, how do we keep output going to a certain level that at least generates revenue for the government and some taxes that come. So an analysis needs to happen by the government, as in, where do we get our most of our taxes? Because definitely income tax is going to reduce. Companies are scaling down, profits are scaling down, people are getting unemployed, so that affects the income tax bracket of the revenue of the government. Are people really importing and exporting that much? So you'll find import taxes are also going to suffer. Excess duty and all these other taxes are also going to suffer as people reduce. Though people are still drinking the alcohol, so they can still get some bit from the sin tax. VAT right now only looks like the only viable option for revenue for the government, and that's why you find that they could only reduce it by 2%. So I think the mandarins in treasury right now have their plate full, because when you're in a situation of increasing an expenditure and reducing revenue, the only option that most people do not want to say, but I'll say it, is the government might end up having to print money if they're already not printing it.
That for this morning, and I want to point you out to what we have there for budgetary policy statement for 2020-2021, which we do expect Reginald will go, as has been the norm there for our economy. Now, in that, there was just this one thing that Yatani wanted to do. Number one, he said that what we're going to do is reduce our national expenditure. And the number two is reduce the budget deficit, which now is being touted to go to 7.7%. Now, when you have this man at the Treasury who's saying, look, I'm going to correct the faults of my predecessor, then all of a sudden, the Treasury is telling you that with the new tax measures that the president wants us to inject, therefore, into the economy, we're going to lose revenues of up to 172 billion, with fears that we might wipe out 1 trillion of the economy. Does it make him go back to the drawing board again and say, well, probably budget deficit now is not at the top of my agenda?
If I was the CS of Treasury, definitely you have to go back to the drawing board. The budget was done under certain assumptions in January, tabled in February, and all the whole process that started last year, culminating in February in what was presented to Parliament with public participation. All the factors that went into that budget have changed. So if the revenue target does not change, then we are dealing with the same problem the predecessor had, which is abracadabra economics. Because if you have certain assumptions that you have built in to say we will get this much revenue, so we will spend this much, and our budget deficit will therefore be this much, then we will borrow this much. Their borrowing has already surpassed what they wanted to borrow in the previous year. So 2020 borrowing is definitely going to be a lot. Going forward, with the tax measures, which they're saying will last a bit longer than just April, May, and June, that means his revenue projections for 2020-2021 also need to change. Or unless they're saying that once we clock 1st of July, everything reverts back to normal, but then the economic fundamentals have changed. Employment, most people are no longer employed. The SME sector is grinding to a halt if it is not grounded to a halt. tourism and hotels have. So your main sources of revenue are also reducing. Safaricom the other day said that their M-Pesa revenue has dropped by close to 7-8%. And Safaricom is the largest taxpayer in the country. So if he does not come back with another budget proposal, and yes, at this point in time, we just have to say to the Constitution, yes, it was supposed to be done by February, but because of the circumstances, we just have to redo another one in light of what is happening. What then should he do in the new budget proposals? Number one, when you're looking at post-COVID, you're looking at an economy which is grounded to a halt, or an economy that is going to contract. Then what does he need to do, knowing that, one, he still has expenditure that is close to fixed. He has to pay salaries. And Kenyan budget, the largest component of our expenditure is actually recurrent expenditure. Development expenditure is very low. So if it was him, it's the question now of, are we going to be able to reduce salaries? We know our MPs and MCAs. I don't think that is going to be possible. They've already said they can't take salary cuts. Then do we scrape off the development expenditure this coming year? Then if they do that, then it's as good as saying that the economy is going to go into a recession if the government is not going to spend anything but just pay salaries. So they now need to sit and say, where do we direct money and to make sure that our deficit is not so much, as much as this time I think they will even have to continue borrowing to pay salaries because of the shortfall in revenue. So even if you are going to borrow, budget deficit will definitely increase. Debt to GDP is going to increase. But they now have to be meticulous on where does this money go. Because this money now needs to go into areas that will make sure that they create jobs, increase income, and therefore increase demand to kickstart this economy. Anything else would be just a death knell to the Kenyan economy.
I like how you're saying that where is this money going, but I want to point you out again to where they really wanted to spend this money by. Does it therefore just concern you when development expenditure for 2020-2021 was reduced by a whopping 587 million, and right now we're talking about redirecting of funds to a weaker healthcare system which needs bolstering at a time when we should be thinking about, okay, since we have a good healthcare system, how can we bolster the rest of the economy, especially the bigger four quarters that contribute heavily to our GDP?
I think at this point in time, yes, expenditure needs to move to the healthcare system in as much as possible as they should, but not just the healthcare system, because you will have good hospitals but a collapsed economy. Then you start having problems that come with anxiety, that come with stress, that come with hunger, that come with poverty. So they have something that they have to juggle. Yes, as much as we need to pump funds into the healthcare so that this thing does not become an epidemic in the country, they also need to make sure that output continues in the economy. So between now and June, before the next budget, how do you reallocate? At this point in time, and as I've mentioned earlier, there are certain expenditures on the development side that we can put on a hold. Things like expenditure on the secretive defense things, we don't need them right now. We don't need the second phase of the SGR right now. Those are some of the things that you can put on hold. If there were funds that had been allocated to that, then we can redirect them to that area so that we don't increase the budget deficit. But one thing that we need to understand is government budgets before they get the money. So they budget, then they go look for the money. So even as we say redirecting, it's not like the money is seated in a vault somewhere waiting just to be moved to another area. They still need to find out where are they going to get this money. And the quagmire that they find themselves in is that some of the money they were hoping to get from KRA is not there. And that's why they've been delaying sending money to counties because, sorry to say, the government was broke. And that situation does not change now because you have COVID. So unless they get money from IMF and World Bank and this money comes, then they say, okay, yes, now this money goes to this area, and that area, and we park what we had budgeted for. Then we start moving towards where we're saying we're moving towards the right direction. Because currently we still have a low-cost problem that needs to be sorted out. Because if we ignore it, then we are just kicking the can down the line. Then we'll have a food crisis in the near future. We are thinking of now importing maize and many other things. So there are a lot of things that are currently mixed up in all this. And we should not hide behind saying that everything is moving to the health sector and COVID when we actually have a brewing storm that they actually need to find ways of trying to steady the ship. They may not be able to calm the storm, but they have to actually steady the ship. And that is where prioritization has to come in. What resources can we get? When can we get them? The nice thing about it, at least, that in terms of debt, if we do get debt suspension and waivers from G20, and not G20 countries, unless China plays ball, because that's the largest debt, I don't think our commercial loans are part of the wave of G20 unless they restructure those loans. We still have domestic debt. Domestic debt, if they restructure, you are making pension funds, insurance companies, and commercial banks suffer. If you notice, the treasury bill auctions have all been underperforming of the recent times. So even the liquidity that was given to banks, even now they are not giving it to the bank. They're not lending to the government because they're not sure how the NPLs will look like after this economic crisis. So they'll rather hold the money that they currently have. So even borrowing is also going to become a problem on how are they going to actually raise this money that they're reallocating. But it's not like they actually have it. And that goes back to the same point that at some point in time, they will actually have to print in Kenya shillings for any Kenya shilling expenditure that is needed by the government, unfortunately.
I just want us to jump into the next one, which is also related to what we're talking about this morning. Now, Kenya's debt, it rose by 127 billion shillings in March, with the country chalking up more external loans as it looked for ways to deal with coronavirus pandemic. Now, the country's debt now stands at 6.28 trillion after it added 95 billion worth of foreign loans and 32 billion in domestic debt. Now, this comes at a time when Kenya is expected to save approximately 71 billion from the debt service suspension by G20. Now, the money is expected to go directly into bolstering the health system in the country. There are fears, therefore, that the level of debt could also change dramatically with the coronavirus crisis that has seen the government go into the market for 122 billion from the World Bank and External Monetary Fund. Now, with a slower growth projection for 2020, which most analysts are predicting to be the slowest since 2009, does it change Okorie-Yattane's plan for reduced government expenditure? Therefore, how do we understand the postponement of the loan repayments by G20 if the money is going into bolstering a weak healthcare system with no immediate economic returns? And does it complicate our debt problem? Now, Reginald, I just want us to attack that one now, that our foreign debt now stands at 51%. Good. And that the external debt, therefore, has rose by 3% to 3.2 trillion shillings as of March. Is that what Okorie-Yattane wanted in terms of restructuring our loans?
Definitely not, because they wanted to restructure from the expensive commercial loans to restructure to the less expensive concessional or bilateral loans. The loans from the IMF and World Bank are not commercial, so at least most of them actually not even coming as loans. They may be coming as grants. And with grants, really, as long as they can prove that the money actually went to where it was supposed, it will not really add to our debt. Anything that will add to our debt is something that is going to come as a bilateral loan or a concessional loan. So as long as they're getting these funds from IMF and World Bank and everywhere they're getting them, and they're getting them as grants, grants are normally project-based. So that will be good. It will not really affect our debt situation. The pushing of debt and relief on more of moratoriums by our current creditors is good, but it is not a debt waiver. So we still have to pay it at some point in time. With the debt at 6.8 trillion closing into to 7 trillion, with our GDP at 9-10 trillion, and we expect that GDP to contract this year, it definitely complicates our ability to service and repay our debt, especially the ones that are denominated in foreign currency. The local currency one, you can just print your way out of it, because you just digitally credit the bond or rollover the treasury bill and the bonds of the government. So in terms of restructuring, I think this situation of COVID would actually help. It will actually help the government and the treasury to be more bolder in restructuring the debt of the economy. Countries like Argentina have just said we can't pay. Either we will pay later or we literally just can't pay. It is a bad thing when you default, but Argentina has defaulted 7 times and people still lend to it. So this thing of trying to have a tag of, oh, we've never defaulted on our loan, in times like this is where you sit down and you tell your banks and say, yes, we have this 91, 182, you have our 364-day treasury bill paper. We want to restructure this because we need money to go to other sectors. So why not say every 91-day treasury bill paper maturity is extended to 364-day? So you have not defaulted, you've restructured it and pushed it forward, you've restructured the maturity, they'll continue still earning interest. You can easily come and say, hey guys, we have this number of bonds that we have with you. We are in a tight spot, yeah? So, and the tight spot we are in is that if we don't restructure, we will default. And for us not to default, we want to cut the interest payment on this bond security by 20-30% down so that you reduce your interest payment and coupon payment. Go to the Eurobond market and say, guys, we have this Eurobond, we're supposed to pay, our exports are dwindling, we are not able to export. So our foreign currency revenue is reducing, our diaspora remittances are reducing, tourism is grounded to a halt, we're not able to earn hard currency. Our horticulture sector is not able to export the same things that we're exporting. Is there a way we can extend the tenure of these Euro bonds? Is there a way we can get maybe a longer moratorium until we start earning hard currency again? Those are the discussions that they need to start having and give them a plan on how this restructuring and how they are restructuring the economy and trying to stimulate the economy so that these payments start going on. Then you get confidence. As a bondholder and as a person who, as a creditor, I would rather get something than nothing. So if I know if I play hardball, you will default, I would rather say, okay, yes, it was at 9%, let's reduce the interest to 4.5%, increase the tenure by 2-3 years. That way you have restructured the debt. But if you keep quiet and pray and hope that some guy seated somewhere in Brussels or New York will have pity and mercy on us, then we might find ourselves shocked that come June and maybe the COVID situation is going down, people come knocking on the door and say, hey, you owe us money.
I want to point you out to another concern really that is actually even going directly when we talk about this debt. You do know that we did go into the market therefore and ask World Bank for a loan. We did also ask our partners to give us a loan to the tune of 122 billion. That's fine. But when you are also now getting these moratoriums and whatever it is that you're getting back is going to get galloped by the healthcare system, does it even bother you that even when it comes therefore to repaying these loans, that your other areas that give you this money, let's talk about the manufacturing sector, the agriculture sector, the diaspora remit, will not be at that level therefore to give you this money? Because if you look at what other nations are doing, they're sort of talking like, okay, we're going to go back, give you an economic package that's going to go into the strong areas of the economy as we wait to restructure for post-COVID-19. But here locally, anything that we're getting, we're saying, okay, put it into the healthcare system. Does that bother you that even after this period expires, yes, for example, now we've got this 73 billion shillings that we've saved, that we won't be having stronger economies from our sectors and industries to enable us repay these monies?
Definitely. You see, Kenya's debt already was unproductive, even before COVID. We had a currency mismatch. We were borrowing in dollars to spend in projects that generate Kenya shillings and that don't generate dollars. So that was already a problem that we were having. So our debt already had serious problems, even before this whole COVID scenario actually came into play. And our ability to reservice this debt. People need to understand, Kenyan Eurobonds are rated as highly speculative. They are not investment grade securities. So when Fitch and Moody do their ratings, we are on a B minus or something, which is highly speculative, which is a grade before junk, sorry to say. So it's not like our bonds are super good bonds that everyone wants to. The type of investors that invest in African Eurobonds are not investors who want security. They're not they're investors who are willing to chase a bit of high yield, taking the higher risk that we currently have. So yes, we have gotten these extra loans. Definitely, they're not going to any area that is going to be productive. Most of them are going into the healthcare, PPEs, getting ventilators. But the question, like what you said, post-COVID, these will have to be paid and be paid from the productive side of the economy, which is currently crumbling. And that's why I said earlier, as much as we are looking at the health crisis, if we forget the other sectors of the economy, that after post-COVID, we'll find ourselves in a deeper problem than what COVID would have actually been able to do. And that's why restructuring becomes very key. Restructuring your current debt so that you are given breathing room to kickstart the economy again, kickstart the exports again, kickstart the manufacturing sector again, so that you start generating money where you have a window where you don't have pressure to pay anyone or pay anything. Right now, oil prices have tanked to the lowest ever. The savings that government is supposed to be making on this oil should actually be put in a separate fund, which is a debt relief fund. And the unfortunate thing is that we don't have enough storage capacity, because at this point in time, you should have been buying this oil in bulk or getting into oil futures to make sure that you buy this oil at this current price for quite some time. And the savings you make on your import of oil should actually go to reducing your external debt. Should go to reducing the principal on a Eurobond or your principal on your commercial loans that we have taken that are in dollars. The question is, are we planning that way? Are we thinking that way? Or are we only thinking of, let's get more, we will deal with the problem ahead, for profitable kicking the can down the road? So if we don't start saying, where are we saving right now? And like any business or even an individual, when you make money, the first thing that you try and do is reduce your debt before you even think of investing and saving. Because reducing your debt actually seals a hole. But if you save and invest when you have a huge debt which you are not being able to service, then you're putting money in a bucket that has a hole. The problem will continue to compound. At 7 trillion, which is close to 61%, getting to 70% of GDP, which most probably will shrink this year, and 2021 will not even grow that much. I do not think the GDP will bounce back by 5-6% coming next year because of the macroeconomic structural problems that we currently have. Then we are seeing that, are we going to see debt at 80-90% of GDP? And as that percentage goes up, your cost of debt also starts going up. Because how do you cost debt? We take the risk-free rate. From your risk-free rate, you put a default premium. And that default premium goes up by how are you able to service that debt. So if we don't sort out the sectors that generate income for the economy, sectors that generate hard cash, US dollar, your agricultural sector, which we keep on ignoring. But the agricultural sector, the tourism sector, are the sectors that generate dollars for us. We were hiding behind diaspora remittances for a while, saying they're increasing. But those now have started drastically dropping because it's a global problem and everyone is suffering everywhere and people are not sending money. So that's when we realize you cannot grow an economy and you cannot sustain a currency using diaspora remittances alone. You have to build a strong export sector. But do not focus on export when you don't have a strong domestic sector. The problem that we have in Kenya is central bank is trying to do quantitative easing, is trying to increase liquidity. That works in an economy that has a strong domestic sector with a strong domestic demand, because then you boost demand. But we already have not a strong domestic sector, and we heavily rely on exports. That's why our flour farmers are struggling, because locally we cannot consume what they produce, and they have to export everything. Locally, we cannot consume our own tea, and majority has to go to export. So if you look at China, if you look at the US, look at the UK, they have a strong domestic sector. So as Treasury, one of the things that I will be on my table is how then, during this COVID and post-COVID, can I build a strong domestic sector so that the next crisis does not find us flat-footed, where anything that happens globally grinds us to a complete halt.
Reginald, always a pleasure to speak to you, sir.
Thank you.
All right, that is Reginald on exactly where our debt levels and our physical plans really get us now within COVID-19 pandemic and post COVID-19 pandemic. This has been Business AM. You can actually take Reginald all the way to when we started speaking at this morning on YouTube. That is at Metropole TVKE across all your media platforms as well. Text us 2146. It has been Business AM.